that not everybody in the Islamic world is a beetle-eyed terrorist. That some of them actually want human rights and, gosh, democracy, whatever that is. So from there, who knows what the next step might be. If the Egyptians have to fight against the Egyptian army, I think they're going to get more radicalized. And they might even begin to think in terms of the S word again, which was quite popular in the Arab world back in the 1970s. And there's still people living in the Arab world who are old enough to remember when everybody was a socialist, a secular socialist. And that failed, so the Islamic fundamentalism moved in on a, how can you put it, on an empty niche, an empty political niche that socialism and Arab nationalism had failed and vacated. Well, it turns out that very few people in the Arab world are interested in shit-kicking fundamentalism. It's just as unattractive to them as you might think it should be to any average human being. They're not interested in it anymore at all. For a while there, it might have looked slightly revolutionary to younger people, but now they're fed up with it. They've had it. And what they want now is just a normal life with no with neither mullahs nor soldiers ordering them, telling them what to do. So I have to say, if even the Arabs can wake up, what about America? You know, do we have the brains? Do we have the gumption? Do we have the? Are we sick enough yet of capitalist stupidity and inefficiency and badness? Are we fed up enough with pollution and end of the world psychosis? Are we fed up enough with bad, spoiled, ex-Trotskyite neoconservative jerks? You know, who conspire against. Who as good a conspiracy as any Trotskyite ever was, but now it's all in the name of neoliberalism and predatory capitalism. Do you think? I mean, this is really a question, and I'm asking you, and I hope that you'll have something to say about it. I don't know, but it strikes me, as I say, that if even the Arabs, who have not exactly been notorious for their political sophistication in the past 20, 40, 50 years. If even they can wake up, if Spain can wake up, if I don't know where else these things are going on. I know it's happening in Spain, Greece, the edges of Europe, the bankrupt edges of the European Union are waking up. Can it take so long for American society to get a little whiff of this and maybe dare to protest against the subtle and not so subtle oppressions of our government? So as I said, I see some reasons to be very cautiously optimistic. And what role would anarchism have to play in a situation like this? As I said, you know, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Syria, this is not the revolution. They're not talking about socialism. They're certainly not talking about anarchism. I don't know whether anarchism would have a role to play in that part of the world or not. But I think it would here. It would here and in Europe, because this is where we have the tradition of non-authoritarian socialism. And various brands of anarchism. Ask people, Bill, if you ask them to keep it down. I'm losing my voice here. There's not much of an infrastructure left of the anarchist movement. In the 1980s, it actually seemed. In the early 80s, it actually seemed as if anarchism was on the rise. There was, some of you may remember, there was a series of continental gatherings. One of them happened in Mexico, one of them happened in Canada. 3 or 4 of them happened in the USA. Each year they were bigger and more fun and drew people from farther and farther away. And then in 1989, when the Soviet Union began to collapse, there was, well, really 2 years of great fervid optimism about the future. Well, at last, Stalinism has collapsed. Now it's our turn. We're the only faction of the left that's never made a mess of things, essentially because we've never had any power. But that expectation very quickly came to nothing. And it seemed clear that the Soviet Union was such a big whale that when it went down the drain, it took everything with it. And that included every brand of the left, including the non-authoritarian left. And as a result, suddenly the anarchist movement in America began collapsing. Well, that's nothing new. It's happened a number of times before. But this time it began to look, I began to wonder if it wasn't actually a permanent situation. Because between 1991 and now, it's been pretty much a steady decline for non-authoritarian ideas. And even now, I hesitate to try to point to any beacons of hope in the landscape. I don't know of any. I guess that there are still some anarchist groups. There's still a few people living communally on the land or in urban communes. Not as many as there were in the 80s. The 80s, in retrospect, even though historians talk about it as the period when the right began to rise, it should also be seen as a very interesting mixed period in which 60s style small L libertarian or non-authoritarian ideas were also quite popular. In other words, I guess you could say, from my perspective, it looks like the 80s were a period in which everything was in flux, and it wasn't clear how the cookie was going to crumble. And as I say, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that turned out to be the defining event, the end of the 80s. Maybe you could even call it the end of the 60s in a way, the long 60s. And so, what? That makes 20. That makes, it's been at least 30 years. 30 years that I personally have felt. You might disagree. I might hear some disagreement from you, but I personally have felt a gradual diminution. First of all of our older comrades, the ones who were involved in the Spanish Civil War and who knew Emma Goldman or knew the friends of Emma Goldman, they all died off one by one. I don't think there's any of them left now. When me and my friends first joined the LBC, it was full of 80 and 90-year-old heroes and heroines, really interesting people. And we tended to sit at their feet and soak up their wisdom and listen to their adventures. People like Sam and Esther Dolgoff, Brand, my favorite Italian Stirnerite anarchist, left-wing Stirnerite friend who published a lot of books through the Libertarian Book Club back when we were a book club. Crazy books. Is Steve Rabinowitz not here? I think these books are being given to the, what's it called, the left-wing labor library by you, Canada. Is that your understanding?
I think that's a negotiation.
It's a negotiation. Well, so anyway, that's a very good collection, and for you New Yorkers, I strongly recommend that you get to know it and use it if you have any interest in these things from a historical point of view. And all the publications of the Libertarian Book Club will probably, at least 1 or 2 copies each, will probably end up there. And that'll be it. It'll be very hard to find them otherwise. They're, even now, I would say, quite rare. So, they died. We got old. We had a magazine, but that got to be too much trouble. A zine, I should say. The Sporadical, that was a lot of fun. But we don't do that anymore. We don't sell or publish books anymore. We just barely managed to keep this anarchist forum going, these monthly lectures during the winter. And that was it. And that took up the remaining energies that we felt we had to devote to the cause. And now we're really in decline. We really need money. I hate to keep harping on this, but it's true. Money would certainly help keep us going. And I like to think that the reason why we should keep going is because any minute now things are going to change. Any day now, any year now, well, maybe any decade now. Things will change again. And as I say, a lot of Americans will suddenly realize that they really don't enjoy the prospect of a lifetime of work and diddling with their machines. That gadgets are not really a substitute for the pleasures of human existence. And that work is not really a substitute for leisure and pleasure. Those things that we were promised by capitalism not more than a half a century ago. And it was never delivered. And it was never even meant to be delivered. You were always meant to be miserable. Miserable wage slaves. And that's what most of us are. You know, you're lucky if you get to be 65 and then you can retire, and then pretty soon you can start giving all your money to the doctors, and then you die. And that's life under capitalism as far as I'm concerned. And as I say, I thank God every day, even if we don't believe in God, I thank him anyway, or her, because I don't have to work for a living. I have a little money. I'm independently poor. And I can afford to write books. And that's supposed to be my contribution to human betterment, I suppose. Who knows? Anyway, at least I'm not just lying around on the beach, which is probably what I should have done. Become a beachcomber in Tahiti or something. But in any case, I really think that, I don't know, what do you think? Do you think that young people in America can wake up from the trance of mediation and gadget worship and say to themselves that they're interested in finding out whether there's some alternatives? Or am I crazy? I keep expecting to hear that somewhere, you know, in some high school in the Midwest, everybody suddenly rose up and smashed the computers and said we're not having this. Or, you know, what? Some sign, there would be some sign would come that the times they are a-changing again. And I haven't seen it yet, but I have this suspicion that it could be just around the corner. And that's why I want to keep the LBC and the Anarchist Forum going as long as possible, so that we can, if anybody's interested, we can tell them what it used to be like. We can tell them what the good books are, if nothing else. We can share our old crusty reminiscences of you know, what it was like to be stoned on acid in 1968, or whatever it is that we did that we think is, you know, that showed our freedom-loving proclivities. I'm afraid there was no equivalent of the Spanish Civil War for my generation, so we don't have those kind of stories to tell. But in any case, here we are, an unused anti-national resource, you might call us, and waiting, you know, for the other shoe to drop, for the penny to drop, whatever that saying is. Waiting for somebody to catch on that there might be alternatives, and that we know what those alternatives could be. That they're partly based on our new post-60s understanding of the natural way for humans to be in the world. As I said before, the way tribal society used to live, combined with the brilliant 19th century ideologies, ideological thinking of people like Proudhon, or, for example, Gustav Landau, who was took part in the Munich Soviet in 1918, and was actually stomped to death by proto-Nazi militias when the Soviet Republic fell in 1919. A brilliant thinker, and his work is finally coming out in English from, is it AK Press?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes. Landauer, Landeauer, very strongly recommended, especially his book called On Socialism, which really should have a more exciting title. Don't be put off by the title. He was probably the most original anarchist thinker of the early 20th century. So a mix of those things, of old and new sources for anti-authoritarian or non-authoritarian. I think I prefer non-authoritarian because to be anti-something sounds like a kind of waste of time. If that's all you can rise to is to be against something, I think you're wasting your time. And this is why I like non-authoritarian as the descriptive adjective for what it is that we think and try to do. Anarchist is a fairly limited word. It just means being against government. In this respect, there are in fact right-wing anarchists. Some of them we might even be able to collaborate with on certain points. I don't know. It hasn't worked out too well in the past. Mr. Castellanos and I sometimes manage.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question.
Sometimes
Since you know what I'm going to say, I can answer it.
We sometimes manage to collaborate on one or two little things. So I think that's, I've said my piece, but I want to have a long and extended conversation with you. And while my colleague Bill passes the hat,
Yes, it is.
we can have, you can make statements, you can ask me questions if you want, and we can devote another hour to these questions if you want. Yes.
What would you say are the, as we pass the hat, you can't pass that, you ask questions and
I
then,
think
well,
better to pass the hat first and then have the Q&A.
okay, no,